It is great to see so many folks gathered here today. And most importantly, I hope that you and your families are doing well. I love that opening music. Got to keep your head up. It is springtime. It is like volume up, windows down. And as I always say, if you put the heat on, it doesn't even feel that cold if you put the windows down with 55 degrees out there. So thrilled that you're all here. We are wrapping up our full second year of redesigning the future of work. It was an idea that we had at the start of the pandemic back in April of 2020. Every client, HR leader that we knew was up nights and weekends, very much sorting out what the heck to do next, because this moment for HR in this VUCA time of tremendous volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, it really creates a moment where the list for HR leaders has become so darn long. So thrilled that you were all here. I see a lot of folks that are new. So real quick, by way of background, I'm the CEO and founder of Inspire Human Resources. We're an organization that serves both Fortune 500s and high growth companies. We're kind of a ace up the sleeve of both CEOs and heads of HR to handle everything in the areas of HR business partner work, talent management, talent acquisition, total rewards, you name it, we do it. And we have a team of 37 experts who all work fractionally across 12 states, parachuting in at the exact moment of needs for our companies and that we work with. And the need on everyone's mind, which is why we're doing a part 2 on retention and engagement, is very much how to keep a very sticky employee experience. Today, more than ever, we're seeing the value of fractional work. We are all having to think about, really reimagine the way that the work gets done, and getting done both the strategic things that were very much on the agenda and new things that pop up, like there's this heartbreaking war going on in Europe, and it is very much impacting the wellness and mental health of employees. That wasn't on anyone's agenda or focus back in January. And here we are. That's very much top of mind now. So the list, the beat goes on. So let's get right into our discussion on retention and engagement. There are more than 11 million job openings in the US, and the most recent unemployment rate is the lowest it's been since February of 2020. And we cannot forget how at the beginning of the year, back in January, 4 out of 10 people surveyed by Fidelity were planning to change jobs this year, and what is now being called not so much the big quit, but the great reshuffle, the big reshuffle, right? Even that big quit is now morphing into the big reshuffle. It's like if you blink, all of the facts and terms are changing before us in these VUCA times. It's happening in the midst of return to office planning, uncertainty around status of pandemic protocols, things like distancing and masking are changing for some people mid-flight, mid-train ride. So all of this is unfolding. It's a tough market for employers, to say the least. So we are thrilled that we are gathered to very much talk about how to engage and retain our people, particularly our best people. I'm excited to welcome 3 panelists who have, there's no doubt, have a ton of ideas. Christina Westbrooks, people partner at WW, formerly Weight Watchers. Sherry Kottman, Chief People Officer at QuickBase, one of our favorite clients, and Gina Fashaj, Inspire HR expert with a very strong background in HR business partner work. Christina, Sherry, Gina, thank you. I'm so thrilled that you're here with us today. So I want to kick it off. I want to kind of set the table for this conversation. It is critical for an organization to have that clear employee value proposition. We see this in so much literature, and I'm really curious, what is your opinion? Do you think that that is a critical piece of the puzzle? And what are some factors for a truly compelling employee value proposition, or EVP, as it is known? Sherry, if we could kick it off with you.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for the chance to come together and talk about these things. I always learn. I already have learned from this team, so I'm excited to learn from all of you too. So my take on this is sort of 2 points. One is, whenever I hear the word EVP, I think I've just learned in my HR career that anytime that's like HR language. And the only way this stuff really works is if you make it really integrated to the business. If there's anything that this whole disruption has taught me, it's that this isn't sort of an HR over here, business over here moment. The only way the business thrives, it's always been true, but it's just more understood now. The only way a business thrives is if the business goals are the talent goals, and they're very, very connected. And so to me, the answer is, EVP, yeah, kind of, but I wouldn't get caught up in building something kind of academic. In my world, what I've found is that our company purpose serves that. So it's a very simple company purpose that QuickBase has that says unlocking organization's potential. That's the reason our business exists, which ends up being a very crystal clear reason or purpose for our employees. And that's what we want to deliver to our employees when they're part of this team. And so the business purpose and the talent purpose are the same. And to me, that's what you should shoot for. So that's sort of point one, is like tie
I
it
love that.
to the business. And the second point is just authenticity. I think we can get super aspirational about this stuff. And so I just feel like whatever any of us build just has to be living and breathing in the market and in our hallways.
I love that. It's kind of un-HRing some of our HR practices and thinking it's one of those, like, could you explain this to a relative of the next generation up, and would they understand? So that's a great call out. Christina, Gina, anything to add to that?
I would actually double click on what Sherry said about the purpose being clear. If there's any kind of key factors that go into an EVP, I would say having a mission and having a compelling mission for the talent you want to attract is probably the most important part of that. I think a few other things people look for is, and maybe this is, personally speaking, is like, are there opportunities for growth and challenge at the company? And I think one thing which will come up in this conversation is really important is around ways of working. I think that's probably like the thing that's been top of mind for the past 2 years. And so I think things like work-life integration and even office location and do you have an office location play into that?
Absolutely. So with that, before we talk about communicating your formerly known as employee value proposition, I'm now rethinking that thanks to Sherry's illuminating comment. We'd like to take a quick pulse of the group here today. So a poll will pop up in a sec and it will pop onto your screen asking, does your company have a compelling employee value proposition? Just so curious if the folks that have joined us here today have one currently in place, and if so, is it compelling? We always have folks who are in our community who are both from Fortune 500s and high growth, and it always runs the gamut. Okay, so about 50% on the dot of folks say that they do not have one in place, 35% do, and 15% are uncertain, which to me means that maybe we need to rethink the EVP title or that term rather. So when we think about that, what about socializing and kind of getting the word out, kind of socializing the employee value proposition? Have you seen any particularly successful communication tactics to share it so that it really resonates and it's sticky? Gina, if we could begin with you.
I think storytelling is the stickiest way to communicate any benefits that you have. So whether you formally call it an employee value proposition, or it's just really what you're offering, your culture, just the kind of work that you're offering your employees. So I think that's really important, is any intentional time that you can take to have existing employees communicate that, showing and telling about kind of what they're getting from their benefits, why they like working with your company. And you can really integrate that throughout the entire life cycle, right? It doesn't just have to be when you're recruiting. But I did have a thought, and I've been kind of meditating on this, but I think that one of the most compelling things that a company can do is be vulnerable, especially with when bringing in new skill sets, new employees, of this is what we need from you. So not just saying like, this is, what we're going to bring to you as an employee, but this is what we need from you. And I think service is a big reason why anyone works and wants to contribute. And I think being able to say, man, my skill set fits what this company is looking for. My skill set could actually really make an impact, not just in my team, but overall. I think that would be a very compelling piece to bring to your employee value proposition, or whatever we might be calling it now.
I love it. I think that the storytelling is something that we can absolutely all connect with. And I love what you said about vulnerability. I mean, this is a time where we are just the most, unvarnished, unphotoshopped group of people, right, out that we've version of ourselves, right? So to just be vulnerable and talk about why you as a leader work there, why you choose to continue working there. It's a daily choice. Other thoughts?
I'm in love with this idea, Gina. I think it is so brilliant. The idea, it's not just, to me, it's like vulnerability, but it's mostly like we have a need. We're not perfect. We have flaws or gaps or things we haven't gotten right, and you can help us. And when you think about purpose and meaning, and we're going to talk about engagement, like what I believe, I think this just connects a lot to what I believe about about engagement and what really drives it. And it's so much about whether or not we're making a difference in many ways. And that's just such a clear way to say, this is our culture. We're open, transparent, and we need your help. And so there's this beautiful exchange between employees and companies. You're starting right from the get-go. I think it's very cool.
It's great. It's great. And I just to give a quick shout out also to WW, always been a fan of the brand. And there's, it is from its inception, it's always been about that purpose of people living healthy lives. And I think just during the pandemic, just the expansion of, the widening of the aperture on what it is to be healthy. It's not just about food, but the mindset and exercise and all of that. So I know, Christina, you'll be sharing some of your wisdom as we go through. So I'd love to hear what, as we get tactical here, because I always love when folks who join us can leave with 3 things they can bring back to their inbox. What are 1 or 2 specific things that you think business leaders or HR could do, but many have not considered, kind of some hidden gems that could lead to better engagement and retention during these VUCA times, these volatile times? Christina, do you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, I think the really important thing is for leaders to kind of set their orientation and think about how they really drive followership. And I think that's about letting things be a little bit more employee led, which we've kind of given the space to do over the last 2 years. And so I think as a leader, when you really focus on how do I empower employees, how do I make sure they're productive, how do I facilitate that? So, think about what are the obstacles I can remove for you? How can I provide you more clarity in your role during very uncertain times? What can I do to foster your growth? That's the thing that really unlocks amazing potential for people. And it's not only for that individual, but it's for the team. It reflects well on you as a leader. And I think it drives business results as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sherry, thoughts from you?
Yeah, they're very similar to Christina. So the way I talk about engagement is there's really just 2 vectors. One is pride and one is productivity. And pride is the obvious stuff, connecting your values to the company's values, belonging, and purpose in your work, whether purpose in your daily work or purpose in the company's work. But then productivity is, I think, the hidden, underestimated driver of engagement, that nobody comes to work wanting to make no progress.
Right.
And so when progress is stalled or harder than it should be, someone had said to me a while ago, like when the job gets in the way of the work because the systems are bad or the processes stink or the collaboration's broken or the culture is wrong or my rule's not clear, like what Christina said, or that is where I think we could target a ton more. And so when I think about engagement questions, and even our ultimate engagement score is driven by 3 questions on productivity and 3 questions on pride, more than ESAT, because like ESAT is fine, but to me, and certain platforms would say ESAT is the main measure. I don't believe that. I want to get underneath, like, do you have the resources and tools to do your job? What is in the way of you making progress, and getting very targeted on that. And then you just start to knock out the sand in the gears, process by process, bowl of spaghetti by bowl of spaghetti, or bag of hangers by bag of hangers, whatever the messy stuff is that exists in your organization.
Yeah.
You just pick them one by one, the ones that have the biggest impact, and you clear them up.
I love that. Bowls of spaghetti and bags of hanger, gears and sand. I'm like, I've already learned my 3 things for the day. So we've only been together for 17 minutes. So, and I'm just so curious, what does that look like at QuickBase? Again, we're such a fan of what you're doing. Does it show up in town halls, employee communications, one-on-ones with employees? How does that live in your organization? Because I love these concepts.
Yeah. So where we just started, so I've done this in a previous role, and now we're starting to kind of get more focused on it here. But the way that it's the second example of how it shows up is that there's a single question that we ask in our annual survey that says, what is the one thing that we could do to make your employee experience better? Just one thing. So it's a free form. So you can ask all the questions. The number one in every role I've been in now for that open text question is help me be productive. It's whether it's about tools. So you have this amalgamation of, I happen to have, 291 verbatims now that we itemize. And I've got 87 that are focused on this problem. So one of them is onboarding. So we're going to retool that. So I just take that anecdotal data, I quantify it, and then we literally knock it down. And
That's
actually, what I really like is it's not just HR. That onboarding one is HR. It's an example. It's an executive problem. So it's not just our problem. So our executive team is sitting down in our offsite actually Thursday, taking this data and saying, how do we audit and itemize the high value, high stuck factor, processes, find them, and then, isolate and solve as a team.
And I love that this is, again, not an HR thing. It's a business thing, and kind of tasking that for the executive. And here you are in April. I'm hearing it's not one of these initiatives that kind of like happens in that last quarter of the year when it's goal setting time, but it's right at the top of the year, which is great.
Right.
Another piece of the puzzle here around engagement is professional development. I've always believed and always learned through, especially for our Gen Z colleagues, that they'll stay to the extent that they can learn something new. So professional development is important for business and employees now more than ever. And in fact, whenever we parachute in to do a leave of absence or cover an open role, what we often hear from the client is during the time that Inspire was there, the team kind of was organically upskilled, had that role modeling. I think that people are just so hungry for that, especially in these times where people are stretched so much. We have to kind of get back to basics. And I was looking at some data last night. A recent survey from Better Buys found that employees who get professional development are 15% more engaged and have 34% higher retention than those who don't. 34% retention is something that any head of HR that we're working with could use right now. And LinkedIn did a group talent trends report for 22 that found that employees believe that professional development is the number one way to improve company culture. So adding on to productivity, the ability to contribute, professional development. So I'd love to crowdsource here. And in your experience, what types of professional development programs have you seen work well during these times? Christina, do you want to kick that one off? I know WW has a lot underway.
Yes, we have a lot going on in the professional development space. We actually have what's called a Plus More campaign. So it focuses on development in very different areas. So it could be focused on a cohort of junior level leaders. It could be focused on our executives. It could be focused on programs specifically for our diverse populations. So I think that just having a very curated approach to development programs is really important, and like kind of getting people at the right time in their careers. And the other thing that I would add that we really take seriously at WW is actually building in time to focus on development.
Oh, that's great.
I think sometimes that, we have a lot of great programs going on, but then people they wonder like, how can I add this to what I'm already doing?
Right.
So what we've kind of tactically done is build in some Zoom free time during the week. And that'll be like our Wednesday afternoons and our Friday mornings. And that's time to use as you want it, but that's an open invitation to use that to focus on your professional development.
It's fantastic. So can it be both kind of what I call study hall time where your head's down, or something to just help reach your full potential as a human?
100%. And
That's
I mean,
great.
just personally, I use that time. It can either be time for deep work if I have something that, deliverable that I'm working on. I actually also use the Wednesday time to attend one of our virtual workshops. So that's my kind of group time with connecting with the brand and learning more about the member and employee experience as well.
Fantastic. That's great. That's great. And that's so, I think all of our clients, we're advising anything you can do to create that white space, Zoom free, meeting free Fridays. I know we do for the leadership team at Inspire, giving time for folks to very much have the time to do the deep work, which is kind of like that, the curiosity that kind of leads to the better results so often. Gina, thoughts from you? I know that you've worked across so many of our clients. I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, certainly. I think that you cannot downplay the permission almost to give people that time for the deep work. Sometimes they just need I don't know. I just need that permission of like, I want you to take this time to do that deep work to get the traction so that you are making the biggest impact that you can. On the other, 40, 50 hours a week, whatever it
Right,
may
right.
be. I also just think that we've been given such a little bit of a gift, with this COVID environment, with so many accessible programs. And I think that, obviously traditionally companies thought they had to spend thousands of dollars, send someone to a conference. And there are just so many amazing smaller programs that people can take advantage of that can really make a huge difference. I recently took a PowerPoint class with my husband at night. That's fun for us. And so learned a lot about PowerPoint there. And I think, there's Excel programs. There are things that go for just a few weeks, a few days. And I think the choice is a big part, and having your employee come to you and say, this would make a big difference if I got some professional development in this area. So I think just kind of hearing them out of what might help their job, and then giving them the permission and the tools to go ahead and do that.
I love that. I love that. And sometimes it's about the professional development, like the PowerPoint. And sometimes it's just about being given permission that you have time to listen to, whether it's, one of my favorite podcasts. I know, Gina, you and I are both fans of We Can Do Hard Things, Glenn and Melton Doyle, or Happiness Lab. There's just so much, all the research shows that the better you are doing as a human, the more productive and engaged you are. So during these times, really prioritizing. And I think it all starts at the top, right? Like everything, right? The tone is always set at the top. So if we are as HR leaders or leaders of organizations doing that type of self-care, doing that type of professional development, and really holding sacred those Zoom-free parts of our schedule, then folks will realize that it's not just talk, right? It's very much something that is admired. I always say during COVID times, there's a new set of, it's like there's a new sheriff in town, there's a new set of leadership competencies in town, and taking time for self-care, balanced individuals who can, surf these waves is, I think, who everyone wants to be led by. So I love that. I love that. So next up, so managers and supervisors, right? They are playing this very critical role when it comes to retention and engagement. Good Hire, an employment and background screening company, they surveyed 3,000 workers. And I was reading this study, I wanted to share it. Only 32% they found of American workers said that their manager really cares about employee career progression. I winced when I read that. And 82% of US workers said that they would potentially quit their job because of a bad manager, which goes to all the research that's always been there, right? Your direct relationship with your leader always is the number one thing, often before comp. Much to our total rewards colleagues surprised, but because they work so hard to create these beautiful programs. But the reality is, it's your day-to-day experience with your leader, especially during these times when things are much more intimate. So I'd love to share, as a group, how can leaders best engage these treasured mid-level team members in understanding their role in retention and engagement, and being deliberate in fostering that kind of positive culture. It's such an important role, and we can create every program and policy in the world, but these are the folks that are really implementing it. So Gina, could we start with you? Again, you've worked across so many of our clients. I'd love any external best and brightest ideas you can share.
Yes, I just go back to incentives mattering. Who are you holding up as a great leader? Are they, really pouring into their staff? What kind of, I think sometimes as middle-level leaders, it's hard because they're not getting the recognition per se. And so I think that just being really intentional, not only with holding up leaders that are really mentoring and helping that next level. And, just who are you hiring? Who are you firing? Who are you promoting? It's all about how you're living out your values.
Absolutely. And Sherry, again, QuickBase is always a great example, a beacon of light of all these best practices. I'd love to hear what you all are doing and what you really endorse.
I mean, I would reinforce what Gina said. And I think what's happening now, and honestly, this is a wrestling point I think of as an HR leader when you have constrained resources and constrained time and you're trying to figure out who to invest in, because you have many
Sure.
leaders, and honestly, where I've landed is I am focused on our senior leadership team, because the principle I'm anchoring in is managers lead how they're led.
Hmm.
And so if you can teach all day long empathy and leading the full human, not just the work. You can teach
Hmm.
trust, you can teach inclusion in many ways, but most people, it's about experiencing it.
Of
So what does it
course.
look like to live out the stuff Gina talked about? We have not spent enough time on our, like 30 or so senior leaders at a company of our size, which is just around 700 employees,
Mhm.
to say, do they understand what it means to be a empathetic and decisive, performance oriented leader,
Mhm.
and have we invested in that team? So honestly,
Mhm.
that's what it looks like. We're
Yeah.
going that path to get to our front line, to have them experience that leadership as a day-to-day model for what we
And
want our
I'm
employees to
so
experience.
curious, and I know that it's all being developed, but do you have any thoughts on what that will look like? Is it storytelling? Is it training? Is it experiential learning, workshops?
Yeah, it's all the above. I'm genuinely so excited about this right now. It's kind of my number one passionate sort of piece of work. And we're going to bring this team together in person. And it's a combination of all these things, starting with the service, starting with connecting them as a team,
Mm-hmm.
moments of vulnerability and learning, and then
Mm.
and then rooting in the operational stuff, because I actually think sometimes companies, depending on your growth stage, forget that it's not obvious how each strategic move you make connects to every leader. And
Oh,
how can you
yes.
expect a leader to lead with clarity and decisiveness and a sense of, self-centeredness, if they don't understand how they fit into the big picture? So
Mm-hmm.
it's those are the three things. And so it's a bit of like, heart, mind, and hand.
Uh-huh.
But it's going to be a summit of that sort, and then a program that's going to follow, mostly led by the executive team and small groups with our leadership team. I'm glad to share the agenda and toss stuff around if you want to
Yeah.
hear it, but that's
Fantastic.
the program.
I love it. And that will unlock the potential. I love it. All right, it's time for another check-in. We're going to pop up another poll to see how well your leaders and employees are aligned um, on return to office decisions. I know this is on everyone's mind. Let us know from very aligned to not at all to where things stand in your world. I know that the return to office is a topic that we are all sorting out. And it's so funny. Sometimes I think back to over the last 2 years of us gathering, and the return to office has always been part of the discussion, because in earnest, I think many of us thought with hope and optimism that it was a coming, right? But I think this time, I think it's for real. I do not have direct, information from Dr. Fauci, but I think that we're moving to a stage where the plans that we have architected and edited will be able to be tested out. All right. So folks are saying that employees' alignment on return to office decisions are 44%. Somewhat aligned. Okay. So the majority of folks feel that somewhat aligned, 32% are saying not very aligned. Okay. Yeah, this is something that is unfolding real time. And we very much wanted to make time for this in our part two discussion, because as Omicron is more and more in the rearview mirror from what folks experienced over the winter holidays, and I always want to call it B52. This next variant of Omicron is kind of playing out. It's getting more and more real. So I'd love to dive into this a little bit. Many companies are calling more of their employees back to the office, at least part-time. If leaders are set on the idea of in-office work, how can they make this transition as easy as possible and get buy-in from more reluctant employees? Now, Sherry, I'd love to start with you. I just want to acknowledge we could have a whole panel discussion on just this very topic, but we very much heard from folks leading into today that was top of mind, because people are finally implementing many of the plans as we head into spring here. So if we can kick it off with you, and then I'd love to hear from Gina and Christina too.
I think the simple word I'd say is make the office have a clear point. And so if your point isn't clear, whatever it is, if for your culture it's collaboration and particular, work like that, great. For us, coming out of our engagement survey that we just did, it's social. And we're going to be fearless about that. Like the work is running fine. The social connections, people are craving it. So we're
Okay.
going to be clear. about that and design programs to deliver that.
What does fun look like at QuickBase?
So it's obviously being reimagined in many ways, but I'd say right now it looks like it's light. I mean, it's genuinely just light.
Light
I
and
don't
breezy.
plan to over-engineer.
Yeah.
I'll learn as we go.
Yeah.
It's often food,
Yeah.
and hosted by each other, so
Yeah.
not to like mix of people hosting and inviting people together
I love
across a
it.
lot of different jurisdictions and locations.
I love it. And I love what you said about not over engineering it. I think that I think we're on, like return to office 7.0 at this point, but like in 1.0, it was very much about, it felt more architected, like an offsite or a scavenger hunt. It's something was needed. And I think what we really need now is a bag of chips and just some refreshments and just each other in the same room, a sense of humor and seeing each other from the shoulders down. Yeah. It's so simple. Gina, thoughts from you?
I love the honesty piece that QuickBase is doing. It's like, we know you can do the work from anywhere. We just want you to have a place to be social. I think that's fantastic. I see a lot of places that are reticent to take pictures. And I think it is a huge way to get buy-in here is to add a little bit of the FOMO. I think taking pictures of people together at your office, posting it on your social media internally, slacking it, saying, hey, look, like everyone came together and we had a great time and we hope you join us. I think that is a great tool. And I think it's something that gets underutilized a lot. I think it's nice to have pictures of yourself at work. I think it's great to have those and share them.
Absolutely. And I think pre-pandemic, there was a little bit more of that wall that was up, but now it is all just so blurry. As many of us have had, loved ones in the background or pets on our keyboard. It's just kind of a continuation of that. I love the FOMO. That's great. Christina, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, I'm going to have a little bit of a different perspective based on the fact that WW is actually remote friendly. So last year we presented an approach called Work from Wherever. And that basically encompasses the whole spectrum of whether you want to work fully remote, whether you want to be hybrid, or whether you want to be in the office 5 days a week. And so I would say if you're a company that, is set on maybe one approach versus another, maybe being back in the office a bit more, I think the most important thing is just to really explain the why and the how. So, why is being in the office the optimal way to be, to work, to deliver on whatever promise we're delivering on as a company? And then how am I going to make that work? How am I going to make that environment one that you can really be productive in? And I would also say one thing to think about is, what are the things that people feel like they might be losing out on by coming back to the office?
Right.
Very practically, people have longer commutes if they're coming back to the office. So could we give them flexible hours so that we can mitigate that friction a little bit? People might be cooking at home, so they're not, buying lunches out. So could we have like lunch vouchers or reimbursements for things like that? So that's a little bit of an incentive to come back in,
I love that. And I always say there's things that we cannot unsee. So people have seen what it's like to break bread and have dinner with the people that they live with for, call it 600 plus days, right? So it's hard now. Many times when we speak to clients, they'll talk about how real conversations are happening where people will say things like, my child has a Little League game, so I need to work from home on Tuesday because I have to be at the game. And I don't know about you, but pre-pandemic, I felt that people used to do that thing if they had a Little League game where they would like leave their computer on and like they leave their water bottle there and like kind of leave like in like their pashmina, so it kind of looked like they were still at their desk, and that they tiptoe and take the elevator down as if they were in like a covert mission just to get to that Little League game. But now that we've been there for things and showing up for things that fill our heart with joy and heartbreaking things, doctor appointments, etc., we don't want to miss those things as humans. So there are things that we cannot unsee. So I think it's so modern in the way that you're speaking about it, Christine. It's like some folks really need to have that continued flexibility, and other folks are like, if I have to work in my home for one more day, it's just going to be tricky. So please let me back in for 5 days a week. So I love the way that you've worded it and the way that you've branded it. It feels like I'm at a WW meeting. It's like, you pick how you want to use your points, right? You pick how you want to plan your meals. That's great. Okay, what are some things, this is a question that was on folks' mind, what are some things that leaders can do to ensure that they're being inclusive in their decision-making and policies around return to office and future workplace? And, this question is so important because we've seen such increased focus at the very senior levels on DEIB initiatives. And we want to make during the pandemic, and we very much want to make sure that that momentum is there. So if we start with kind of the decision making and the policies, I'd love to hear some innovative things that folks are recommending. Christina, if we can kick it off with you. I know WW has a lot that's unfolding there.
Yes. So, I mean, I would say whenever it comes to policies in general, just having consistent and fair application is just probably always the right approach to take. I think when people feel like they're treated differently for any reason, it just negatively impacts their experience. And that's really what you want to avoid. I think when it comes to inclusion specifically of different groups, I think leaders really need to be aware of the fact that remote working has really changed the dynamic for many groups. It has improved their feeling of equity, their sense of well-being. And there was an article that was out in the New York Times this week. I believe it was called Women of Color Aren't Ready to Return to the Office. Mm-hmm. And it had two very interesting stats, which was that 3% of Black workers that were surveyed, only 3% said they wanted to return to the office. That is a very staggering statistic to know that only 3% of that population feels comfortable returning to the office. And then it had also mentioned that 64% of Black workers felt that they had an increased ability to manage their stress once they began working from home. Mm-hmm. So I feel like for some of those groups, and that extends not only for people of color, but maybe for women, maybe for people of different abilities, going back to the office may not be the exciting prospect that we think it is, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think as leaders, we need to be really conscious of some of the obstacles that our team members face and figure out how we set the right norms and practices and expectations within our group dynamic of how we're going to work.
Absolutely. So many of our clients have spoken about when their colleagues were home that were from traditionally marginalized groups, those the micro inequities and microaggressions happened less. There was less there was just less, unagended space on Zoom. So some of that hallway banter or stuff around the proverbial water cooler wasn't there, as well as if they did have a microaggression, they could finish Zoom and then decompress and process it with someone who lived in their home that felt like a hug and felt like they could then more in that moment center themselves and kind of unfortunately have to get on the next Zoom meeting. And so with one of our clients, we did a listening circle and people spoke about these very things. And so the clients just being very intentional of these types of things as they return, and they're trying to weave it into policies as much as they can. Sherry, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think just building on what Christina said, it's so helpful. And I think how that's manifesting itself at QuickBase is we have loved not only the benefits of hybrid and sort of we've experienced the same things and heard the same things from our, diverse communities and underrepresented populations. And we have grown those communities in our community because of where we're recruiting, which basically means, and that's just because just based on some of our traditional habits we're trying to disrupt and, mm-hmm. Networks and circles, but also just the wider talent pool we have. So in our reality right now, just to be, very specific, what our reality is, remote workers, more of our remote workers away from our offices, that's where the majority of our diverse talent is sitting. Mm. So if we're not careful in our reality, we could dramatically break equity in terms of, great, awesome, bring people to the office if they want to come, but it's totally your choice. But then what's the access point for social connection for those who aren't close by? And that actually runs across the same race and gender line, predominantly racial lines in mm-hmm. our communities, mm-hmm. So we need to disrupt all of that. So paying attention to that stuff really matters. And so ideas are, we're building something called centers of energy. So we're going to take a 50-mile radius sort of circuit of wherever our QuickBase folks are, and we're going to enable them with money and time to be able to convene. And then execs are going to go to those sites. And so we're going to have a cadence of going out as well as coming in and declare those exchanges in intentional ways with a commitment of, this many times per quarter, a couple times per year, cross-functionally. So that, and so far the data we've heard is that that's a big benefit. People want that. And that doesn't mean pressure to be in the office, but it does meet that need of being together, in some way.
I love that.
Those are some expressions of our community that may not apply to all, but great points from Christina. So thanks for kicking that off.
I love that. A gazillion years ago, Christy and I both had the pleasure of working at American Express. And I remember what we would do as HR business partners is we would very much arrange for our leaders to go out into the field, right? So Christine and I worked in downtown Manhattan, but they would go to, the Phoenix location, the London location, et cetera. And it was always about being in the space where our treasured talent were, right? And it is amazing to think that, the 50 or so mile radius is now a remote location, right? But like that is the location. I know that Sherry, as you've reimagined the future of work, you've made an intentional decision about many people being remote. So I love that that's kind of really built into your strategy. We are going to go into our speed round of Q&A in just a moment. So if you have other things that are in your mind, please go ahead and pop them in the chat. But we are slightly obsessed about self-care for HR leaders during this time. And so we always like to ask at the close of our panels what our panelists are doing for self-care. Lord knows we are all about it for our talent. I want to make sure that we keep on our proverbial oxygen masks during these times. So I'd love to hear what y'all are doing for self-care. Gina, why don't we begin with you?
Yeah, I love learning, and I have 2 young children, which suck a lot of my time. Take a lot of my time. Love them to death. But I decided I wanted kind of a creative outlet, so I carved out time to do a wild writing class. It met once a week over lunch, and I would just sit with a small group of people, and we would write. And share what we wrote. And it was just an amazing space and a great way to like check in with myself and have a creative outlet. So I really enjoyed it. And I would say like for like a learning creative outlet, that's kind of how I show self-care.
Oh, I love this. That's awesome. Christina, what are you up to?
I took it in the most literal sense of the word, and I used my flexible Friday afternoons to pamper myself. So one really nice thing about working with WW is that we have an annual wellness benefit. And during the pandemic, I decided to use that to subsidize getting massages. And
Beautiful.
It was something that I think I always thought was just too luxurious, or, just it wasn't for me. And I think once I started to think about myself more and start to do that more regularly, it's something that I think I won't compromise on anymore. So very important.
It's like you've seen something that you cannot unsee.
Exactly.
The massage version of Christina. I love that. I love that. And Sherry, what about you?
So what helps me when I know I'm off is when it's about my identity and how centered I am about what I'm made for. So I feel unwell when I make my work my entire identity, because then it consumes all of my mind and it defines my value more than it should. So for me, mine is a little more abstract, but I do things like make sure, okay, what are the things that are eternally valuable to me? What am I made for? It is bigger than my work. So last week, my family was here. I make it a point to fly my family in a couple times a year, and I completely disconnect. That sounds very basic, but those are the things that keep me centered. My work is in its proper place.
Yes.
And my identity is more complete as a result of that.
That's beautiful. I love it. Goldman just announced that they're moving to mandatory 3 weeks off minimum for folks as a perk of being there. And I think that time to truly disconnect is one. For me, I'll share, my go-to is always walking. I walk about 18 miles a week, and I'm like the mailman, hail, rain, snow, like I'm out there. But I realized I have 2 17-year-olds at home, 2 11th graders. And I realized last night that I am so rarely just in quiet that I woke up this morning at 5 and I was like, well, I have the whole house to myself. So I literally sat and had I have oatmeal every morning. I sat out on our little deck in total silence and just watched the sun come up. And it was just not an iPad, not just me and the birds and the air. And I felt like a millionaire just to have those 15 minutes. Best oatmeal ever. So who knows what my self-care hack will be for our next one, but that one is hot off the presses today. Okay. And if folks have any awesome ideas for self-care, please put them in the chat. We're always crowdsourcing. Okay. So we're going to go to our speed round. There was so much excitement about this webinar. We had many folks send in questions even before. So first up, what are some strategies, policies, or tips for engagement and inclusive leadership among a fully remote workforce? Who wants to kick off that one?
jump in real quick? I think Sherry touched on it a little bit when she said that what her data showed. And I think a lot of it is just listening, asking intentionally and listening to what your remote force wants and needs, or maybe where they're struggling. And I think polling is a great way to do that. Sherry, I know QuickBase has a few different touch points, if you don't mind sharing them.
Yeah, I suppose there's a few, and we do our engagement survey. We use a lot of sort of survey tooling like that. We also have, we bring our site leaders, instead of including remote leadership together, we have representatives. We come together a month so that our experiences, whatever it is we're doing, whatever initiative we're driving, it's globally consistent but locally expressed. And so you feel like, okay, well, what happens in Sofia, Bulgaria feels very different from what happens in Waltham or Boston, Massachusetts. So I want those local leaders to feel empowered to drive cultural, application to what it is that we're doing. So that's the same for our remote team. So we have a couple employees who represent that community and help us understand what matters to them. So it's in-person exchanges as well as survey tools.
Beautiful. One quick thing I'll just mention. Oh, Christina, did you have, please go ahead.
No, actually, I was just would echo what Sherry said. I mean, I think checking in frequently has been something that WW has done over the course of the last 2 years. And so, probably before the pandemic, we had our annual engagement survey and maybe a few more targeted pulses throughout the year. And I think just during the pandemic, just because of the need for connection and collaboration, really understanding what people needed, we just dialed that up.
Yeah. And boy, with that, I'm always looking for the silver linings through the pandemic. Boy, we need to take that with us moving forward, no matter where people are working anywhere. Checking in with folks is key. We've heard from several of our clients that as they've returned return to office and seeing people in person for the first time in 2 years, that they've been surprised at just the people have spoken really openly about the mental health toll that it's taken on them and their family. And just creating, again, there's a new set of leadership competencies in town, but really to be ready to have those conversations. Most, those were not in historical leadership classes pre-pandemic, but to really hold space for those moments as people just need to just talk about how they're doing mind, body, and soul. I'll also share one of our clients spoke about how they had a colleague a transgender colleague who transitioned during this time, and it was such the employee said it was such an easier experience, if they had to be in the office all the time. So as they're just preparing for folks to be more hybrid, they're just updating all of their policies to make sure that it's a very inclusive experience when that person returns. Everything from updating their employee badge with an updated photo to name changes in the system, just so it's as smooth a transition as possible. Okay, next up, could you share any strategies for engagement specifically for a globally distributed team? And Christina, I'd love to kick it off with you on that one because of WW's footprint.
Yeah,
globally.
I think one of the practices, maybe less around employee engagement, but I think does drive engagement, is how we do meetings and the remote and distributed teams now. And one of the rules we try to have is one person, one Zoom. So it doesn't matter where you're sitting, whether you're sitting in your office in Paris or you're sitting in the New York boardroom, and you're looking at that big screen, you still have your camera in front of you with your Zoom and you're still looking at that person. And that just creates a lot of equity across the team and across that employee experience.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, next up, we have about 7 minutes to go, but we'll keep on cruising. How many employers or how are employers retaining multi-generations of employees with varying needs? Again, we could do a whole webinar on this, but I'd love any thoughts on how we're retaining folks across generations. It's really part of the overall inclusion strategy. Yeah.
So I just have a couple thoughts. I'm not sure I've totally cracked this code. So number one, I just think knowing the data makes a ton of don't forget that part. Know your data. Because, average age is one thing, but representation across different tenure, across different demographics, that sounds so simple, but I think it's really easy to jump to conclusions about, we have a young workforce, or, we have, so the data matters to start with. And then there's something that I've heard that coming from a prior company, I thought more about this, but today I'm thinking about something different. There's a opportunity, there's something called the top 25. it's one thing to be able to bring together teams according to business and work and things like that. But there's a business, and this is an idea I want to pick up, that took their most tenured 25 employees. This is not necessarily mapped to generation, but often
Sure,
there's
tenure.
a correlation.
Yeah.
Tenure, there can be a correlation. In our company, there is a decent correlation here. Top 25 of people who've been there at the company the longest, who can engage with the leadership team in a separate and focused way on the strategy and direction of the company.
Huh.
So you could apply that idea, not just by function or hierarchy or things like that, but just you could apply it by demographic and you could apply it by tenure. And I think it could be interesting to engage with our communities like that. And so top 25 is one example. That's
that.
something I'm excited to try.
I love that. Okay, next up, near and dear to my heart, the original reason that I was inspired to create our firm. What is the future of work for working mothers? Light topic. Gina, I'd love to kick it off with you, as I know you have 2 little ones at home that you shared.
Yes. Oh man. I mean, the word flexibility is really just top of mind. I think, people who can also, I think that as a working parent, you also find how to be the most productive with the hours that you are given, whether
Sure.
that's with your children or with work. Just kind of how do I do the most with the time that I'm given? And so I think that the flexibility piece is just absolutely key. I think that people who are, I always kind of think about it as like, it's not hours, it's impact.
Oh, sure. Results.
Yes, exactly. It's just so results driven. So I think it's just going to be that open communication with working moms or working parents. And I think another just big component is I see a lot of working parents where other people on the team think that more flexibility is given to them. And I think that it's a leader's job to make sure that everyone knows that there's flexibility in all parts of life. I mean, if you're a caregiver of any age, you need a lot of flexibility. So I think it's just like that constant communication of if you have a child, great, they need time. But like if you have a pet that needs to go to, like, flexibility is so important. And I think that everyone is realizing that they have things in their life that they need that flexibility for. So I think working moms definitely need to ask for the flexibility, and then leaders need to make sure that there's just constant communication with everyone on the team.
Absolutely. And I always say fractional work makes us whole. Also, that part-time flexibility lets you be a whole person and make time for other parts of your life. I think the pet piece is so key. We had a speaker 3 months ago talk about how many folks who got through the pandemic with their pet. It was, and that is, so that pet having an illness or God forbid, passing is a traumatic event. And they actually expanded their leave policy for bereavement for loss of pet. Because just that acknowledgement that folks getting through the pandemic with their pets was so key. So, okay, next up, do you have any tips specific for high potential team members, our treasured high pos? Anyone want to take that one?
Do you mean in recognizing them and retaining them, I assume?
Oh, sorry, in retaining and engaging.
Yeah. I mean, my take here is maybe 2 things, if I could summarize it. Our company is going to go through a change where we are shifting away from annual reviews where you recognize performance by looking backwards. And to me, the most powerful way to engage high potential and high performing people is by looking forward and helping them get to their goals. So when you think about incentives, back to Gina's earlier point, and the programs that are driving incentives, the question I often ask myself is our manager and is our HR time being spent on stuff that's really high value? Are we just running a bunch of programs that are like sucking the life out of us for a couple months and they're really not delivering the value and the message we want to our employees? So I would say, to me, the programs that I believe in would be our hypos get accelerated access to comp advancement through a range based on their performance, accelerated access to promotions based on their performance. And that's what your 9-box calibration talent management processes are about. rather than fussing over ratings that look backwards for kind of minor fluctuations in bonus payouts that I just don't think really scratch the itch of what our high performing and high potential people care about.
It's great. So innovative as always. I love how you're just reimagining everything. So last question to take us home. This is the $1 million question. No pressure. What factors are causing employees to stay in their roles right now, as opposed to seeking opportunities elsewhere? And if anyone can nail this, you basically should write an article for the New York Times, because this is the holy grail. So again, no pressure, but does anyone want to take that one? Any quick wins for retaining employees so they are not looking distracted by opportunities elsewhere?
Gosh, I hope this doesn't sound calculated, I guess, but incentives that you have to wait for, vesting, parental leave that has a time, states are different, but I think that those are big incentives for people to stay. I did work at a company that had a really unique benefit of a first-time homebuyer program. They had a really young generation that came in, a lot of people out of college. And after a year of working there, you could get a tax benefit and help buying your first home. So I think if you're having a really hard time, I think there's so much more wonderful things that people could stay for. But I do think that that is a factor that people consider when they're thinking of leaving. Is there a benefit that I can take advantage of at a certain point that I'm excited about?
Beautiful, beautiful. And on that note of financial wellness, which is such a priority, that brings us to the top of the hour. So I want to just say, Sherry, Christina, Gina, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us today. For those of you who joined us, thank you. You can catch up on all of our past sessions on our site, which is inspirehumanresources.com. I hope to see you on May 19th. We'll be talking all about talent development, and we'll actually be joined by the head of talent for Zoom, as in Zoom. So I will see you May 19th. In the meantime, take good care, keep up with the self-care, and stay healthy. Be well. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.